Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we're gonna finish our project that we started last week. We did a whole bunch of fabric manipulation, or like fabric works, I guess. We started off with embroidering so much, and then my highlight, we did a whole bunch of felting. This spans over the whole rain guard, which goes into the sleeve. It's like a double sleeve situation here, which is, I think, a really neat and, elegant detail. And you can't spot it from the front, so it is, a little thing that you see only from the back. And I'm super excited to finish this project today. I'm super excited to finish this. I already started, obviously, as you can see, with one side, so I can show you the other side today. And yeah, let's see how this goes. If you find a link to the pattern down in the description box below, it's already up, obviously. If not, I will upload it as soon as I am done with it, which means as soon as I am done with finishing the edit of the video or the videos of this project. So just check out the description box down below, or if you want to be up to date always, go ahead and follow me on my Instagram, as I am posting everything in my stories there, and I'll, you have the most recent updates as fast as possible over on my stories. So links to all of that are in the description down below. But yeah, enough talking, let's go ahead and start working on today's project. We are gonna start with our pocket, which is gonna sit on like somewhat the side, and for that we're gonna grab a few pieces. So we have the upper side front, the upper side back, the lower side piece, and then the pocket flap. So obviously you're gonna have two of each. I already made the other side, so I only have one left. So with this piece, we're gonna close basically our side seam with the pocket sitting right here in the pocket seam here, which is shaped to the size of our pocket. And I want the pocket not being a flap, so I don't want it to sit on the upper piece here, but I want it to actually sit on the bottom right here, because it's pretty big and I don't want to fumble all the time with like flipping this up and then being able to use my pocket. Like, to me, this is just a decorative element which is going to sit on the lower piece, and the pocket is just going to be up here, and we're going to close it with a push button so that it is safe. But that's just an extra piece that you technically can also like leave out if you don't like the look, because it is non-functional. It is just for aesthetics, I guess. Obviously, if you are an advanced sewist, you can also put it up here and make it a functional pocket flap, I guess. But for this video, for the sake of my design, I am going to put it on the lower piece right here. But before we do that, I actually forgot one piece, which is the pocket facing, of course, because we have to finish our pocket before we sew it onto our piece. So the pocket itself, as I said, will be sewn onto the lower side piece. So we have to finish everything except this pocket seam right here. So I'm just gonna put right sides together of the pocket flap, so the facing and the pocket flap shell, and I'm gonna close all around here. Okay, we are going to clip away the edges here, just for the sake of turning it over a little bit easier, and that's what we're gonna do now. I like to wiggle the piece like this, because it just lays better then and it's easier to iron. So I'm gonna iron so that the ditch is only visible on the facing side. I'm also gonna make sure that the edges, the corners, are nice as it can be with a thick fabric like this. So let's iron. And with any woolen fabric, it really helps to use a clapper like this, or any wooden, like flat surface, because it just keeps the shape as you ironed it. So that's really, really helpful. And I honestly also use it for any other material, because it just helps cooling down the fabric in shape. So therefore it stays how you ironed it. At this point, you can add any top stitches that you like, because this is literally just flap that's gonna sit there non-functional. So you can add a top stitch. I'm not gonna do that because I like to have a clean look, and I'm just also replicating what I did on the other side. So there's no top stitching for me. And now I have my lower side piece, and I'm essentially just gonna check for my notch right here, which is exactly where I'm gonna put my flap. like this. And then the upper piece, and this is a bit shrunken because of ironing and everything, but I am going to match up my stitching line, which I'm just gonna draw it on for you guys. Right here is my stitching line. So right at the edge, but a centimeter in from this point that we did not finish. And right here is my stitching line, which is also a centimeter in from all sides. So these 2 points need to match up like this. And if, you know, it bubbles up like that, just stretch it out, because that's probably just from ironing. And this has the stay stitch, whereas the flap doesn't. So this tends to stretch out and this can't, obviously. So now I'm just gonna sew this on. I'm just gonna baste it on into the seam allowance right here. And everything here will be finished with the pocket on the inside. So let's just baste this on. I just like to iron everything flat now that both pieces are sewn together. And now it's time to sew the side pieces together. And for the side pieces, just for the sake of sewing in the sleeve later on, I'm just gonna leave about 10 centimeters up here under the arm. I'm just gonna leave that open. You can also just finish it, and then you probably have to undo it a tiny bit because it's just easier to sew in the end with all of the different layers and such. So I like to just start from the bottom and then just match everything up, but you know, just only sew until a certain point so that you have a little bit of space once you actually work with the sleeve to, you know, move around and stuff. Let's close this. And the side seam gets ironed open. You can continue the ironing up here, but it's not really necessary because we're gonna close it as well, and then it's gonna lay like that anyways. Okay, and now this seam here, the side seam, is also our notch for our pocket. So this is also gonna end up, you know, being sewn onto our side front piece right here. So let's go ahead and do that. I have one pocket here, and it's gonna end up being here on this line. So I wanna have my stitching line, which is again a centimeter measured in on all edges, which is gonna sit right here. So the seam is already my finished stitching line here. And I'm just gonna move a centimeter upwards. So these two crosses need to match up like here. And then these two edges, there's also the stitching line that we need to match up. So it's like right here. And then for the pocket, it's also like right here. And these two crosses need to match up again, like so. And the in-between needs to be matched up. Now just ease both pieces together. They should perfectly match up as they are the same length, but they're just, you know, curved in the opposite ways. That's why it seems to be a bit funky. And now we're gonna sew from the seam, from the side seam, not any further, all the way to that cross that we did. So just leave the seam allowances free and just sew until, for me, it's right where I put my needle, so right in here. Let's iron the seam allowance flat, or the seam allowance into the pocket, as it's gonna want to lay anyways, because the pocket has a smaller or thinner fabric than the actual shell. And I'm also gonna add an understitching line right here, probably like 5 millimeters next to the ditch, so like right here. Because it is a thicker fabric, anything too close would just look weird, so I'm just gonna do a 5 millimeter one. Essentially, we're gonna do the same thing to the other pocket, so to the flap right here. So I'm gonna put right sides together of lower side piece, flap, and the pocket. And I'm also gonna match up all of the stitching lines. So just as we did for the other pocket, the stitching line for the pocket here is measured in a centimeter on all sides. Right here, it is where the notch is, and that is also where the flap stops. So that needs to match up with the pocket. And then up here, we need the same spot, like measured a centimeter in on all sides, and that needs to match up with the same spot that we marked for the pocket flap. So right here, measured a centimeter in on all sides. And now the rest just gets pinned together, should be the same length as the seam anyways. And I'm gonna start sewing from right here, from that stitching line that we marked with the pin, all the way up to this stitching line. So just from flap corner here to flap corner here. And that seam also gets understitched at 5 millimeters, same as here. With all of that now done, we're gonna flip this towards the wrong side of the fabric. This is now gonna be a thicker seam because we have so many layers already, but you just want to iron this nicely and give this probably a lot of bit of pressure. And what I did, what I really liked was to also understitch from this side here. So just once over to this side, because it just keeps everything, you know, together, and it just looks better and it just works out a teeny tiny bit better. I see that I have not caught this layer anyway, so I have to redo this, but just add another top stitch right here. Okay, now that is all done, and technically these two pieces should fit right on top of each other, just like so. Now we have to do a few things. So the first one is to cut towards the stitching line right here where the notch is, so that we can release all of this bulk essentially and sew everything together. So I just want to cut into the shell towards the stitching line here, so that I can take out the seam allowance and use it like so. So I just flipped it back out. It was like this before, flipped it back out, and I can use it now to sew this together here. And I want to do the same thing here. And I intentionally am not cutting into the actual seam because I fear that it would, you know, undo the seam otherwise. So now, with all of this now prepped, I can put the lower piece on top of the back side piece and pin these two pieces together until I reach, you know, the notch that we just freed essentially right here. I like using a pin. I know that the notch ends in the seam right here, and it also ends just where the flap begins, so right here. And I'm just gonna pin these two layers together. And I want to have the pocket not be part of that. So I want to be able to use the pocket seam freely as well, because I can then continue stitching the pockets together like so. So match those two pieces up. Then right here where the side seam is my pivoting point, and I'm gonna go into the pocket seam, which should also match up. And I'm gonna go all the way until here. So these 2 points also need to match up. And one last thing that I want to check before sewing everything together is, once I lay these two pieces flat, does the pocket, you know, lay flat, or does it wobble somewhere? And if it wobbles, wrinkles up, whatever, I want to adjust the pocket until it lays flat. And if the pockets don't perfectly match up, like right here, that does not matter. I'm just gonna sew them as they want to lay, because otherwise you're just gonna create folds and whatnot, and we're just gonna sew around here as they are and cut the excess off, or leave it, it doesn't matter. But you want to check that this is correct, and now we can go ahead on the inside obviously and stitch from this side, so from the back all the way to the side seam, pivot, go around the pocket, and end right here where all of the edges meet. So I want to end right in that spot where I finished the pocket flap, which will be right here. So also a centimeter measured in from all edges right here. Okay, that's what it looks like. Looks a bit wobbly still, but with ironing, all of this should go away. So this seam right here, I want to iron open just to avoid any unnecessary bulk. And as you can see, we run into a little bit of a problem here. To avoid that, I'm gonna cut towards the stitching line somewhere here, so that the seam here can lay open, but the rest, as it wants to, lay towards the lower piece right here. Let's go ahead and iron from the right side to press everything flat. And then we're gonna add some bar tacks to the pocket flap to create a little bit more strength, and then the pocket should be finished. I'm also gonna go ahead and iron the pocket itself. And as you can see, it already looks pretty nice. So I wanna add some bar tacks, and I'm just gonna copy them from my other piece right here so that I stay in a symmetric way. So I did a bar tag like right here, 5 millimeters to both sides just to fix this upper edge in place and to give it more strength, because I feel like if something rips, it would be up here. And then also I added another one down here, also this kind of edge shape here, corner shape, because I don't want this to, you know, flop around like this all the time. I want this to stay right there. Let's add a little bit of pins in here, and the pocket should not overlap these points. Up here it would, but you can just stitch over that, so you don't need to worry about sewing the pocket shut or anything like that. So we can just pin this and then add bar tags as marked. Okay, that's the pocket done. You just need to add a snap button to the inside here, like somewhere here. I am gonna use these cute brown ones right here. They're also pretty big, so I think they fit the theme. Obviously they're gonna sit on the inside right here, but you know, I just like to have a little bit of security with my pockets. They're not necessary. You can just leave the pocket as is. Since the pocket is horizontal, there's not going to be that danger of stuff falling out. I still just like to have a little bit of closure right here. So I'm going to do that off camera, add the snap button by hand, and then we can continue with all of the other stuff. So I'm going to continue with just putting the body together of this coat. So I have my front piece right here. This is a big piece because it's going to, you know, fold over like that and have this big collar piece here. But this just goes together with that dividing seam right here in the front. And we have a notch that goes together with this part here where we stopped sewing the pocket on. So this is the pocket notch right here. So I'm gonna start pinning the two layers together from the pocket notch. And super important, obviously the pocket needs to be out of the way. We don't want to stitch down the pocket. Now I'm gonna use a needle to mark my stitching line, and that stitching line goes in right there where the pocket stops, and from there on you can work your way up and down towards the, in this case, shoulder seam, and the other direction the hemline, and everything in between just gets matched up and sewn together from hem all the way up to shoulder seam. I'm gonna iron the seam allowance open, and around the area where my pocket is, I had to stop and start sewing again, because eventually you're gonna run into the problem of the pocket itself. So you want to just bar tack and skip over the pocket, just flip it out of the way, and then continue down all the way to your hem, or up all the way to your shoulder, depending on from which side you come. And then what I did was I checked whether the seam looked good and added a little safety seam right here just to close that small gap that this technique creates. And you know, it just fixes the pocket to the side it's supposed to lay, so in this case towards the front, and it's not gonna close the pocket or anything like that. It's just gonna add this teeny tiny little triangular piece right here that you can't access, but that's fine. So for ironing, I'm just gonna cut into the seam allowance somewhere below that point and then somewhere above that point, so that I can iron everything below and above open and the rest can face the front. Make sure that the flap on the other side lays correctly, and now I can just go over this area and iron. And I want to iron from the right side as well once I'm done with this. So just gonna prep this, and then from the pocket upwards I'm gonna iron the front dividing seam open again. Let's flip this whole thing around and see how this intersection here looks like. It looks to be completely fine, but I still want to press everything from the right side as well. Okay, like this. Now everything lays nice and flat like this, and the pocket is completely done now. Let's add the back piece here to the back dividing seam. It's a bit hard for me to show you everything because the piece is so big. Let's lay it this way. So we're gonna add the back piece right here. You're gonna find a notch which needs to go together with this seam right here, the pocket seam. And this seam is just easy. You don't need to worry about anything. Just match everything up and stitch the two pieces together. We're also going to iron this open, and that is the other half of the corpus already done. So the last thing that we need to do is to close the shoulder seam before we can add the sleeves. So you want to match up your stitching line again right here at the neckline. Then there is the dividing seam that you want to match up. And then of course the point where the sleeve gets attached. And the shoulder is in the back a teeny tiny bit bigger than in the front. That's supposed to be like that. So you just ease them together, and you do that because it just looks and falls better that way. So don't worry if they're not perfectly matching up at first glance. So like that, and we're just gonna close the shoulder seam and iron everything open. I like to iron the shoulder seam on my tailor's ham just because the seam itself is also curved, so it just helps with a curved surface. And I also want to make sure to iron from the right side just to get the most crisp seam that you can get, like that. And now it's time to do the sleeve. So we have a two-parted sleeve that we simply sew together as the first step. So you want to put the lower and upper sleeve right sides together here and just close the sleeve dividing seam. Same thing, let's iron the seam allowance open. I like to use a tailor's ham here as well, as the seam is curved. Like that. And the sleeve is already put together, so we can lay this aside because we don't need it like right away. But we need to grab our rain guard now, because as you can see here, this looks like a sleeve shape, and that is exactly what it is. The rain guard gets partially sewn into the sleeve, and that creates this really nice detail here at the shoulder seam where it looks like that there is no back sleeve seam. There obviously is, but still it just looks really cool. So what we're gonna do is lay our shoulder seam flat like that. This right here is the back and this is the front, and the rain guard right here has the back neckline, so it follows the back neckline and goes into the shoulder seam here. So this portion of the rain guard is actually the shoulder seam. So what we want to do here is put our rain guard right sides together with our shoulder seam in the corpus and put it together right here in the shoulder seam. And we want to go from the neckline right here all the way to the stitching line right here. So this is where I added my pin again, and I'm going to mark it for you. I'm going to use my stitching line, which I just marked, and in that corner that this created, I'm going to add a pin, and that pin needs to match up with the stitching line in my shoulder seam at the sleeve area. So I'm going to just put this right in here to match these up, and then add a pin to pin them together. And this needs to be matched up as well. And I'm going to stitch from this pin here, from where my stitching line is, all the way. You can sew off here. But essentially what I want to do is stitch either right into the ditch of my shoulder seam or a teeny tiny bit into the front piece. So a teeny tiny bit like right here next to it, so that I make sure that there is no visible stitching line and that everything is, secured on. So let's go ahead and do that. Stitch from here to here, probably with this side facing up. You can also use this side facing up, but here you have like somewhat of a guide because of the shoulder seam. And once you remove all of your pins and you flip your rain guard towards the back where it's supposed to lay, you can see that there is no visible stitching line. I stitched like just next to my shoulder seam here. Here you can see it, like a millimeter next to it. And once I flip this, it all is hidden underneath the rain guard. And we can go ahead and iron that with all of the seam allowances as they were ironed before. So the shoulder seam was ironed open, and then the rain guard needs to face into the back, otherwise it's just not possible, like so. And now what we're gonna do is we're also going to sew the sleeve part of our rain guard onto our actual sleeve. Now right here is a turning point, a pivoting point, where we need to cut towards the stitching line, otherwise we're not going to be able to actually sew this. So right here where we stopped stitching, I'm just going to cut towards that stitching line, stop a teeny tiny bit before you reach the actual point. And now, as you can see, you can use that seam allowance, and you want to put right sides together like so, and just put that sleeve shape onto your arm's eye. And now you see the reason why it was important to leave that tiny bit open, because we need to add the rain guard into our general side seam there. If not, you have to reopen it, and we can just skip that step by just, leaving it open like that. The two pieces should fit together perfectly as they are the same length. And now we can sew from the side seam all the way until we reach that point where we stopped stitching the rain guard onto our shoulder seam. And now once we flip this over, we have created this interesting seam for our shoulder. So right here at that corner is our actual shoulder point, but you can't see the back arm's eye seam because it is hidden by the rain guard. So that is the special thing for this piece right here. And underneath that, we now have essentially a full arms where we can just simply fit our already finished, ready to go sleeve in. So we are finding our shoulder notch right here that goes together with the point here at the shoulder seam. And this is going to be a pretty thick seam because we have so many layers now, but all of these just need to be matched up. The rain guard in the front arm's eye is exactly the same as in the sleeve, so we just match these up. And then for the back, we do exactly the same thing. Again, very helpful to have left the side seam open a tiny bit so that we can fit in the sleeve, match up the back sleeve notch with the back sleeve seam, and then all of the in-between like that. And now we can sew the sleeve in. And now let's check if everything looks good, which it seems to do. So now we can go on the inside and turn everything wrong sides out so that we can finally close the full sleeve seam. So right here for the underarm, we want, as usual, all of the seam allowances face into the sleeve. I'm gonna do that with a few pins. So I'm gonna make sure that where there is only a single layer, or like 2 layers, I guess, that is pretty nicely pinned together. And then where there is a lot of bulk, I'm gonna add another pin, and I'm gonna sew into the direction of the sleeve anyway. So this usually already tends to go by machine, just face the correct direction, but I need to make sure with a few pins. And then the rain guard has one still open raw edge that needs to be sewn into the side seam, and it's gonna match up with our hem notch down here. So the hem facing will be folded upwards at the same spot where the rain guard stops. So quickly going to pin the rain guard right there where the notch is, but then I'm also going to pin the other sleeve side, so the back sleeve, on top of that so that everything matches up like so. And then the in-between also needs to match up. This is a lot of layers again, so be sure to prep this nicely with all of the layers, being at the same level like this. And now we're going to close the remaining sleeve side seam. While everything is turned wrong sides out still, I want to insert my sleeve board and just iron everything open. The rain guard will want to lay towards the back sleeve because it lays towards the front on the shell side. So I'm just gonna iron it like that as well, just to avoid any unnecessary bulk. And then everything down here, I want to iron open as well. I'm just gonna check how far I can go before that big blob of seam allowance starts. And I think I'm just gonna press it down as is and, just try to making it flat without forcing it towards the sleeve. too much because it's not gonna be able to lay over top of so many different pieces, layers, I guess. The 1 centimeter seam allowance just won't fit over it anyways. So I'm just gonna iron it as far over as I can and just leave it at that. And then the rest of the seam allowance here also needs to get ironed into the sleeve as good as possible. And I want to make sure to also press all of this from the right side as well, because it's not going to be pressed too good just from the wrong side, as it's so thick it just won't reach, I guess. Okay, let's turn everything right sides out and press again. Especially here at that point, I want it to lay flat and nice without any folds. Like that. And I feel like it looks really good now. So basically the only thing that's left for this part of the coat is to close the center back. And I want to close the center back with everything inside basically, so the rain guard is going to be closed into the center back as well, so that it doesn't flop up. Otherwise you would have sewn it down anyways. You can add a button detail or whatnot to it, but I'm just going to sew it into the center back seam all together. So let's go ahead and dissect this whole thing that I pinned onto my dress form so that I can take off the facings and only have the corpus reveal, the shell, like that. And now I have two very bulky sides, and I'm just gonna put the center back together, and hopefully I'm able to sew everything together evenly and nicely. Obviously it is a lot of fabric here. It could be a bit more. Let me think about this. I'll sew it together and check what it looks like, and if it's not a good option, I'll show you how to sew this together differently. So let's go ahead and close, you cannot see anything. Let's go ahead and close the center back seam with the rain guard inside of this upper section of the seam. Okay, let's iron the seam open. I don't know what fell, but something fell. Okay, this worked actually out better than expected. I had the fear that this like thickness here at the center just wouldn't let me sew or iron or anything, but it actually did pretty well. So let's go over this from the right side again. Maybe I even want to add a button here. I'm not sure about that yet because I don't want this to, you know, look overcrowded. And I feel like the detail with the felting is already a lot. So I don't want to, you know, be too messy up here. But that is the center back now also done. So I can get the first glimpse at my actual work. Let's close the front darts as well, because otherwise this is just flopping down. So in the front, you're gonna find a big dart. This is a big dart right here. And what you want to do is just fold this and just close this dart on both sides. And then the shell minus the lapel is done. So I'm gonna close both of these really quick. Let's iron the dart open. This is gonna lay on itself, so it's gonna lay like this anyway. So this point, the tip of the dart, doesn't really matter. It matters for the facing. But for the collar and stuff like that, we need this to lay open, so let's just iron it open. So let's continue with the inner collar and inner collar stand. This is the set that will be attached to the shell. The outer of these will be attached to the facing and the lining on the inside then. So let's go ahead and close the collar stand seam. So this is this line right here, which is gonna go together with the collar stand like so. Let's put together the center back, which should be marked with a notch. Then the sides and the in-between, you might need to cut into the seam allowance of either the collar or the collar stand. But for me, I can just ease them together like so. And now I'm gonna close the collar stand seam. What I did here now is to reinforce the collar stand with a few seams. You can do them however you want. I chose to do some, horizontal seams next to each other, some parallel seams, and then do this zigzag pattern right here. You can see it better on this side. And that's just to reinforce the collar stand. You can, do any pattern that you like. You can do a contrast color for the thread. I just chose to use the same colored thread and just have this little detail. Whenever it pops up, it will be hidden underneath, but who knows? It's just a small little detail to look nice, and it serves the purpose of reinforcement, so that's also important. So now with this completed, we can go ahead and add the collar to the shell. And I want to access the neckline, so I'm gonna have everything lay right in front of me like so. And I want to also go ahead and place the collar right sides onto my neckline. So I have the center back marked, so that's gonna get matched up with the center back in the shell, obviously. And then the shoulder seam also has a notch right here, so we match that up as well. And now this part here has this little corner where we want to pivot the whole shell and continue sewing on the collar onto this seam right here. So what we want to do is cut towards the stitching line. I'm gonna draw in the stitching line for you guys again so that you can see what I mean. So right here is 1 centimeter measured in from all directions, and I'm going to cut right before that so I can pivot my shell right here into the corner and put everything together. Now, right here is also important because I need to match this point where my stitching line is that I marked up with the point in my collar stand that is also my stitching line. So I like to do that with a few pins, that way it's just the easiest for me. But you can obviously also do this in 2 different seams. I'm just gonna do it in 1 complete seam, but you could technically also back tack here and then, pin this side together and start again here. But it also works in 1 go, like so. I need some stronger pins for this fabric here. And match these 2 lengths up. And here it's important that the dart seam allowance is ironed open because this is gonna get sewn onto the collar and it needs to be pressed open for that to lay flat. And now we're just gonna repeat the same on the other side. Okay, like this. And now I can sew this whole piece together in 1 go. I'm gonna start here. I like to have my body, not the collar, face up because then I can see the corner and I know exactly where to sew. So I'm gonna go over here and to the other side. Okay, let's check it out. And this is what the corner should look like. I'm gonna go ahead and iron everything as well. So all of the seam allowance should face into the collar stand right here. I'm gonna check that out in a second because usually right here it does not really want to do that. So I'm kind of thinking about ironing most of this open apart from that lower line right here. So apart from up until here, and everything here I'm gonna iron open. Let's actually do that. I think that is the best solution. Let's start from here and iron this open. And I just merged that seam allowance towards the outside here to get a good transition. And then all of the neckline seam, the back neck seam, gets ironed into the collar stand. So this can be a bit tricky because there's a lot of curves that are facing in different directions. So just take your time, and you can also reinforce that with a top stitch next to this seam right here, which I'm also gonna do. So like right here onto the collar stand. So now that I can finally put this thing on, I can actually show you a really cool feature about this coat. So you have it on, but you can also go in cape mode. So obviously this is a very large collar. So if you're freezing outside, you can just flip up your collar and you have some sort of scarf, which is really fun. I'm also thinking like adding a hood would also be really, really cool. But that's neither here nor there. I'm definitely not gonna change this up now. But it's really nice that you have this feature, and then you can also see the color stand. So that's really cool. If you want to add a cute little feature to the color stand, it will be visible in cape mode. So go ahead and do that for, you know, just that little bit of fun. And that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. I had so much fun working on this project, finishing the coat and like doing all the hand sewing kind of stuff on the inside. That's really, really nice and cool. And of course, the beautiful embroidery and the felting technique in the back. Absolutely love it. And if you haven't already, go check out the first part of this project, which is not the tutorial, but the making of. It's going to be linked in the eye and also in the description down below. So do check that out. It's very interesting as I'm showing you all of the techniques that are in this coat. And if you haven't already, please go ahead and subscribe to my channel and ring the bell so you'll get notified every time that I post. I post on Sunday, so you can keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, if you haven't already, please go over to my social media and check out my content there and hit follow. I'm doing short format content all about hacks, tips and tricks regarding all the projects that I upload here on my YouTube. So if you're interested in that, do check that out. Links are also in the description down below. The most direct way to support me is to head over to my Etsy store, where you'll find also this pattern and so many more patterns. And if you're, you know, watching this when I'm uploading it, there's actually a big sale going on for Black Friday and Cyber Monday. So head over there and, you know, get all of your dream patterns that you've always wanted for a discounted price. And another way to support me and my channel is to hit join down below, so to become a member. So thank you so much to all of you guys for watching, and I'm gonna see you next Sunday. Bye guys!
Tschüss.